Hey, spiritual extremists, Dr. Lloyd-Moffett here, and we're going to look at Kinsey's study of um, spiritual insanity in the Indian context, particularly among Hinduism. And he recognizes three different ways in which spiritual insanity has played a role historically in India. Let's look at those. The first is to show the total absorption into the divine. Now, let's recall that in Hindu mysticism, one form of mysticism is bhakti. Bhakti is that participation in the divine, that intense love where you lose yourself. And part of a total loss of self is the loss of a mind. You no longer in control of what you do and what you see and what you hear. You are so absorbed into the divine that you appear as crazy or literally losing your mind. And so as a part of the bhakti tradition, we see a number of different saints over the years who appear crazy and yet holy, but they are that way because they are so absorbed into the divine being that they've lost themselves. That's the first one. The second is to emulate divinity. This is a sort of what would Jesus do in the Indian context. So if the divine seems crazy, if you're emulating that, you might do that as well. Now, of course, that begs the question, why would the divine seem crazy? I mean, why would Krishna or Shiva or some other face of the divine seem crazy? Well, let me try to explain this motivation for you. Um, First, when you think about that fundamental line between creator and created, that is, the creator is free to create any way the creator wants. It can create whatever rules that will govern this world that we are going to live in. But we, as created beings, we must follow the laws of gravity, the laws of physics, the laws of how the world works. And so to show that the gods are not part of creation, to show that the gods are completely free, unlimited, and unbounded, you often see the gods doing things that might seem to us to be insane. There's a wonderful story in Hinduism that the world is like a big sandbox and the gods are the children playing in it. And what's that to show is that they are not bounded by any humanly constructed norm. No material norm bounds that of a creator. And so if the gods need to sometimes act crazy to show that they are so unattached to this world, so emulating that divine craziness can be a means of it. Second of all, remember when we looked at Hindu mysticism in the yoga front, we showed that all things are one ultimately. And so this distinctions that we see in the world, the distinction between you and me, but also between me and this flower or this tree, this is just a, a temporary distinction and different, because ultimately we are all Brahman. And the problem is we make these distinctions between your peg and my peg, between feces and French fries, and everything in the end is merely a part of Brahman. And so in order to remind ourselves that this supposed rational ordered world in which we live is only tenuously there, it's only partially reflective of reality, sometimes the gods play with it in order to show that this is just a game in the end. These distinctions are not real. Everything is one in the end. And so we have these stories of gods acting crazy to show, to teach us that the world is not ordered all the time. And so Kinsey points out that one of the reasons why we might act insane is to emulate the gods who act insane, because there's a lesson there to teach the world about the tenuous order. The last thing that Kinsey mentions is to show someone who has renounced the world. This is classic courting social dishonor. We saw this before when we looked at some of the Samyasin Upanishads, but what we see here is that in order to be rejected by the world around you, to detach yourself from the opinion of others, some within India have acted insane. This is sort of a classic example within the ascetic tradition. So, Kinsey, in his historical study of holy madness in India, points out three basic categories of spiritual psychosis. The first, when you're totally absorbed in the divine and you've lost yourself and lost your mind. Second, when people want to emulate the gods who are free and unbridled, and who are constantly trying to teach us that the distinctions of this world don't make sense in some universal sense. And third, to renounce the attachment to the social world, and as an ascetic technique to court social dishonor. So Kinsey finds those three areas in traditional Hinduism that you should know.